people participating, regular farmers, youth, women who were participating in the movement. None of them expected the movement to become what it was. This absolutely glorious movement, and I think arguably the biggest farmers movement in the world. A government in the center that openly advocates Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, right? Obviously a state which has a religious and a linguistic minority is bound to feel threatened. The number of women that came from Haryana and participated in the movement, was fascinating. After Shaheen Bagh, now you have this movement, so the Muslim women who were leading that movement at the anti-CAA movement, and now you have all these women who hardly moved out, women from agricultural communities, farming communities that have hardly moved out of the villages, have lived in very sort of patriarchal feudal societies, and are suddenly now, on stage singing, preparing songs, giving speeches. So I just think that the ripple effects of movements are much bigger than the immediate cause of what the movement started out for.
We are here today with Nakul Singh Sawhney. Nakul is one of the most prominent and enterprising documentary makers and the founder of Chalchitra Abhiyan in West UP. Nakul's works, including Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai, have won huge critical acclaim, and it's contributed to working for a more just, more inclusive India in different ways. So we have Nakul Singh Sawhney. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ashley.
Right. Nakul, you for the last 2-3 years you've been involved with this movie that you're doing on farm produce, right? So could you tell us a little bit about your movie, as well as what you understand, what you think is the relevance of the farmer movements in the larger Indian political scenario, as well as for the local situation in West UP and Punjab?
I think you've asked me a very, very vast question because I've always felt that the farmers movement is something that can't be viewed, understood or analyzed from a singular lens. People participating, regular farmers, youth, women who were participating in the movement, none of them expected the movement to become what it was, this absolutely glorious movement, and I think arguably the biggest farmers movement in the world ever, right? Punjab, Haryana, West UP and North Rajasthan, these are the regions that were most actively participated in the movement. That's also because, geographically these are the parts that sort of are closest to Delhi, and the movement started in Punjab. Haryana joined in very spontaneously. Gradually West UP played a very significant role, and when you're asking about, we could talk about this in greater detail, about the sort of ripple effects it had politically in West UP as well, and the North Rajasthan, right? And it's not as if other parts of the country didn't support the movement, but like I said, there was a lot of support that came from Kerala, from Tamil Nadu, from Maharashtra, and delegations from different Kisan organizations in these states were also sent to the location, the protest site, right? And but of course, since just because of the geographical distance, it's not easy to for them to have come in large numbers the way Punjab, Haryana, West UP and North Rajasthan did. I think in North India, where what it's done also is that, because now we're talking about after Hindenburg, just as one example, because there's so much else that happened, but just one small example, that after the Hindenburg report, and one is talking about the grand scale of the manipulation done by Adani at the behest of this government, right? But actually it was also the farmers movement that got everybody talking about how two big corporate houses, the Ambanis and the Adanis, are actually in many ways ruling the country today, right? And it was fascinating how that became part of the political discourse of North India as well. Ambani, Adani suddenly became household names for the wrong reasons, or well, for the right reasons, because they were being criticized and their role in Indian politics was being criticized. So just that, that's just one example of how it gave rise to to a completely new discourse, right? Because what started off, and like I said, that there were many other churnings that led to the movement. So in my opinion, the 3 farm laws were essentially, it was really the last nail in the coffin. I think there was a churning happening in many parts of North India for different reasons, for vastly different reasons, and I think all of that got consolidated beautifully in a movement, like I said, which was started by farmers of Punjab and then Haryana and other parts as well after that. So and that consolidation, from economic distress to social distress to so much of the social that we've seen in North India, especially, maybe not as much in Kerala, but the religious discord that we're seeing, growing polarization, and how actually it even began the process of reversing that polarization.
Yeah, I'm interested in that, because there's UP, there was this huge social antagonism between communities. What did the farmers' movement do to heal this condition and change this, correct this wrong, or repair the wound, so to speak? I mean, could you tell us something concrete about some incidents that you might have witnessed since you worked there?
What was fascinating was, and you, while introducing me, you said that at my previous, the last feature-length film I'd worked on was a film called Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai. That's a film that is about Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai, looks at the riots that broke out in 2013 in Muzaffarnagar and Shamli districts of West UP. This kind of sectarian violence, one of the reasons, and what was very unfortunate about, among other things, of course, the large-scale destruction to life and property, but what was very disheartening also was that actually it was there's a very militant, strong Kisan union over here called the Bharatiya Kisan Union, and which was the big one of the tallest Kisan netas of North India, Mahendra Singh Takayat. It was under his leadership that this union was formed, and one of the most prominent slogans of the union was Har Har Mahadev, Allahu Akbar, Har Har Mahadev, sort of denoting the unity of Hindu and Muslim farmers in the region. These are regions, this entire sugarcane belt of West UP has very large Muslim, has a fairly big Muslim population as well. Each district, I think it will vary anywhere between 30 to 45%, right? And so the unity of Hindu and Muslim farmers was actually at the core of the strength of this union. Of course, there were other aspects of the union that can be criticized, and it was largely, many would characterize it largely, at least among the Hindu farmers, many would characterize it as a union which was largely a union that belonged to Jat farmers only, right? But again, all of that has also begun to change after the movement. But coming back, so what was very unfortunate was that this union got completely hijacked at one level. It was the platform of this union which was used to drive a wedge between Hindu and Muslim farmers, and between Hindus and Muslims generally of the region. And it was at the 7th of September 2013, there was a big Mahapanchayat that had happened, that took place in Muzaffarnagar district, and which is ironically a BKU panchayat, but it got completely hijacked by local BJP leaders and leaders of other Hindutva organizations in the region. And that actually, it was then a series of incidents that sparked off the violence soon after. And that's really what made BJP very powerful in the region as well. What was fascinating then was that Rakesh Takayat, who was often criticized people say that he and his brother Naresh Takayat, who were the leaders of the biggest leaders of the Bharatiya Kisan Union in West UP today. One of the criticisms was that they didn't do enough to stop BJP or from hijacking their platform, or that they were actually, there are many theories that claim that they were also hand in glove with the BJP in this. After the 26th of January, the police had come to remove the gathering at Ghazipur border, and a lot of people before the 26th were very apprehensive about Rakesh Takayat's role in the movement. Many felt that he was probably a government plant, who'd been an agent of the government who's been planted there to eventually try and destroy the movement from within. But actually on the 26th of January, when the police came to remove the gathering at Ghazipur border, Rakesh Takayat broke down and became very emotional, and those videos of him breaking down just went very, very viral across West UP. And he cried and he said the biggest mistake of my life was voting for the BJP in 2013. And that just set into motion. Farmers in West UP mobilized, and very spontaneously, on seeing this video, overnight. And then suddenly West UP, farmers from West UP, both Hindu and Muslim farmers from West UP, were heavily invested in the movement. 2 days later, 2 days or 1 day after this incident where Rakesh Tiket became emotional and he broke down, there was a big Mahapanchayat in Muzaffarnagar again. Among the many leaders who attended it, of course, there was Jain Chaudhary ji, who's the president, national president of the Rashtriya Lok Dal, a prominent party of West UP, and a party that especially Hindu and Muslim farmers, particularly Jat farmers and Muslim farmers, had always reposed their faith in. Which became extremely weak after the 2013 riots. There was Naresh Tiketji, and then there was Ghulam Mohammad Jola Sahab. And on that stage, and in front of a massive gathering, Ghulam Mohammad Jola very openly said that the two biggest mistakes you've made so far is, one, you got Ajit Singh defeated, and two, that you killed Muslims. And there was no attempts at shutting him up. There was no booing. There was pin drop silence, and there was introspection. And both the big Jat leaders, Jain Chaudhary and Rakesh Tiketji, got up and they hugged him and they hugged each other. And leader after leader, several Jat leaders on stage, very openly said that we made a huge mistake in 2013. It shouldn't have happened. And there was a very sort of organic truth and reconciliation mission playing out. It was, and it just happened over and over again. Muslims also spoke about how they felt cheated in 2013.
Right. So one interesting thing here is, because farmer protests is against some laws, but it's also a means of community creation, a new kind of community, a more inclusive, more ethical, more understanding, a kinder community is getting built. So now I want to talk about something else, because you did this movie on Muzaffarnagar. You continue to work there through Chalchitra Abhiyan. So it shows films, it documents, it works there locally. Why did you choose to work there in West UP, and why the medium of films? Why the medium of documentary? Why this exercise in showing films? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
After when we started working on the film Muzaffarnagar Baqiya, one of the things we realized was that a lot of fake news, lots of false videos, manipulated videos, and and this was all over social media. Played a very, very big role in vitiating the atmosphere in 2013, and not just social media, actually, even the way the local mainstream media was covering a lot of incidents. Everything was being given a sort of communal color to try and polarize society. And unfortunately, we realized that there was no real counter to it on the ground, right? And a lot of activists in the region felt that there was this major vacuum, and I'm saying that there was no. So I think CCA was in many ways born out of that vacuum, right? And one of the things I had decided when we started working on CCA was, so after the film got over, the film was released in January 2015, and then I continued to travel across West UP, just meet more and more people, just get a sense of the place. And I think one of our biggest challenges in 2015, when I started working to build CCA, was one of what was very important to me all along was that it's not something that can be run by people in Delhi. It shouldn't be run by people in some big metropolitan city who land up only when a big incident takes place, right? It has to be created, it has to be run by the local community, by the youth of the local community. Young people who've taken to the camera and who are very interested in broadly, making all kinds of non-fiction video stories, really. We screen films very regularly, and that's not just our work. So what we do is, of course, there's a lot of dissemination of our work on social media, but we also go from village to village where we organize screenings of regular, these could be fiction, non-fiction, films of all kinds, Indian, international, different genres. But before that, we also screen some video made by us in the recent past, right? Like the film screenings that we do, right? That's and so there are about 12 to 15 odd villages around CCA where we've been, around Kandla Township in Shamli is where our office is based. Shamli district is in West UP again, and that was again, like I said, Muzaffarnagar and Shamli. These were the two most affected districts by the violence of 2013. And it's very interesting, because we have all sorts of conversations after the film. It just gives rise to very interesting debates and discussions in this in a space of heightened polarization. The only things that begin to matter are Hindu-Muslim, and real issues, livelihood issues that actually concern people get completely washed away, get invisibilized. So the idea was to bring back to the fore issues that concern the most marginalized, and the idea is and hand over the camera to the most marginalized youth as well, so that they can tell their own stories or stories in their immediate surroundings, right? And those films, then those videos, then became very important, and at the same time, also on some occasions we've been able to counter some kind of local fake news and intervene at very otherwise we've seen how there was a spate of smaller riots before the 2013 riot, right? And none of that, unfortunately, there was no intervention by the mainstream media then. So because of those local interventions we make very often when there is some sort of a skirmish, we've been able to draw the attention of the mainstream media and actually stop it from becoming and escalating something bigger.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a very important work that needs to be done in terms of both the content and the space and the platform, I think. Yeah, Nakul, the other thing I want to ask you is that, when we talk about farmer movements, right, farmer movements, the imagery was very it came with the people from Punjab and the whole idea of, Sikhs, and you talked about how there was an attempt to divide between Sikhs and Hindus from certain media. Now, the interesting question here is, the important question I think is, Sikhs are like, because of 1984, one knows what happened to the Sikh minority in the north. So in terms of Sikhs today, how does the community deal with those wounds? Is there a way in which they've repaired, they're ethically engaged with it, they've worked on it? What is the afterlife of being an attacked minority in the North Indian context for the Sikhs?
I think, like any community, there's obviously no homogeneous reaction, right? And I think different sections respond very differently. Also, I think what is, say for example, while you spoke of 84, and 84, I mean, saw massive violence in many parts of North India. It was really a pogrom against the Sikh community. I mean, one would be wrong in calling it a riot, because it was really one-sided violence. But at the same time, in the 80s, in Punjab itself, there was massive state repression during the years of Khalistan militancy and the demand for and when the secessionist Khalistan movement, the Khalistan militancy grew across the state. There was also massive state repression, so in many ways it was a very wounded community. Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra in some of his reports had actually said that and he very meticulously documented the missing persons of Punjab in that time. So a lot of young people had gone missing under all sorts of charges, terrorism charges and so on and so forth. So according to his reports, as according to reports by Jaswant Singh Khalra, I think at least he said that about 25,000 people had gone missing in that 1.5 decades of militancy. So that's a massive, that just gives you a sense of the trauma that an entire people and a lot of people who were also opposed to, say, the Khalistanis or the Khalistani militancy, but and they were sandwiched between the Indian state and the Khalistani militancy, and there was enough repression at one level, even both sides, right? But it was a very wounded state, right? And actually we've seen consistent sort of deindustrialization of Punjab since the 80s. There's been a consistent deindustrialization. The agrarian patterns that Green Revolution threw Punjab into, so it was also the farmers who'd seen prosperity for some time, but then it peaked, I think, in the 80s, early 80s, and then it just started going downhill from there, because those agrarian patterns weren't, one can talk about that in greater detail, but in the long run they were not sustainable. And there was no attempt at changing those patterns by the state. So it's also a state that felt very cheated, that we became the food bowl, the rice bowl, and why should Punjab have been growing so much paddy in the first place? But you did it because the state said that you should do it, right? So there was also the sense of feeling cheated that, you know, we supplied, we've been the food bowl for India for so many years, but, you know, this is what we get back.
Many of them have gone abroad and they are now rich, a rich community. Is this like, you know, how are they dealing with this new realities? And with the farmer movement, did this whole Khalistani movement come back, or did the farmer movement also weaken the Khalistani kind of argument? What did it do?
What's interesting is that this was a movement against the Indian state, right? And again, like, you know, and also at the time, I mean, like I said, that, you know, the 3 farm laws was the last tipping point, really, because, you know, all that a lot of young people in Punjab are essentially left with is their land now. You don't have jobs, you don't have other opportunities. There's, like I said, it's a deindustrialized state. Public education, public health has been nothing to boast of for many years. So, and that's why there's been this also this mad rush to go abroad. You know, people often sort of mockingly speak of Punjab, where, oh, there's always one relative in Canada and there's one in Australia, one in the US. But there are reasons for that. You know, a government in the center that openly advocates Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, right? Obviously, a state which has a religious and a linguistic minority is bound to feel threatened, right? Where your very identity is at stake. And we've seen that, you know, with other states which are linguistic minorities, be it Tamil Nadu, Kerala, other parts as well. You know, there is a sense of insecurity about or states in the northeast. Similarly, in Punjab, there is obviously that kind of insecurity, right? So where it is a linguistic minority as well as a religious minority which is in a majority in that state. And there's always been a two-pronged agenda of the Sangh Parivar, right, vis-a-vis vis-a-vis the minority religions in India. On the one hand, there are Abrahamic, on the one hand, there are non-Indic minorities, right, like Christianity or Islam, Abrahamic faiths that don't technically come from the subcontinent, weren't born in the subcontinent, right? And there's their attitude towards them has been an attitude of othering, right? And at the same time, there are Indic minorities, Sikhi being the largest in India, but Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, a lot of tribal religions, and the attempt there is not of othering but at appropriating and not accepting that Indic minorities or that other non-Hindu Indic religions have an identity of their own and have emerged historically one can go into that in greater detail, but some other time. But what I'm saying is that they have an independent identity of their own, distinct from Hinduism. Of course, there will be elements that overlap, but that's because culturally there will always be similarities, because some similarities, but many differences as well, right? So within the Hindutva agenda, you know, and there is that attempt at there is an attempt at otherizing, like I said, for non-Indic minorities, but with Indic minorities, that attempt at appropriation, and when that happens, and what you're essentially trying to say is that, what they're essentially trying to say is that, oh, these are all religions that are part of the larger Hindu fold, you know, and I think that's very problematic, because then you're not willing to accept that these are, you're robbing these religions of their identity, right? So I think otherizing becomes just as problematic as appropriating, and appropriating becomes just as problematic as otherizing. And while of course one looks at and glorifies syncretic cultures, you know, and syncretic societies, and there's been a lot of that in Punjab, like there has been in many other parts of the country or of the subcontinent at one time, right? But at the same time, syncretism, it becomes a slightly more complicated terrain for Indic religions, right? Because there is always this fear of being appropriated under syncretism. So there is also that fear that also manifested itself, you know, and I think it manifested itself in a very, very positive direction. Now, when you're saying it got channelized by the Kisan Andolan, so, you know, I think there's been years of frustration, anger, a feeling of helplessness in your own homeland, and at the same time, you know, your lands are going to be taken away from you. That's all you're left with. Like I said, there's no employment, nothing, and you're left with your lands. And then there is a government that wants to take away your lands through these laws, wants to rob you of, you know, what is core to your identity, agriculture. And then at the same time, is also a community that is a government that doesn't respect your language, doesn't respect your religion. And so I think all of that gets consolidated in a very positive direction. These insecurities get this anger, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, I was also talking about it because farmer movement also used the constitution, it also used the flag in a big way. So there's a constitutionalism argument that we saw in Shaheen Bagh, so it was a kind of a continuation in a certain way. Now the last point I want to say is that, like, you know, now farmer movement has given us a particular kind of hope. So like Raymond Williams says, the point of politics is not to make despair convincing, but hope possible. So there is a certain way in which communities can remake themselves, wounds can be healed, repairs can be made, and then we can move towards a future bound collective, and becoming a future bound collective based on constitutional values and so on and so forth. So in this sort of a thing, and you are as a filmmaker, as an activist, as a young person who has a certain kind of idea about a particular kind of India, what is it that you know, having seen all this, what is it that you would tell the youngsters? What is it that you would tell the onlookers and people who are away from all this, you know, in a certain way, we're just reading about it. What is your biggest takeaway from not just farmer protest, but having seen a riot and aftermath and the kind of, you know, changing of the course of history, and now what is it that, you know, you would say, okay, if there's one takeaway, what would that be from all this? From 2013
like I said, right,
in the last one decade, yeah.
Like I said, you can't understand the farmers' movement from a singular lens, and I don't think there's one takeaway from the movement as well. What I have understood though is I think a lot of activists on the ground are constantly working towards very often building movements, and I've come to realize, be it Shaheen Bagh, I think there are three very glorious movements I've seen, other than the students' movements, but three very glorious movements I've seen closely since the Modi government came to power. One was, the first was when the Supreme Court had revoked the SC/ST Atrocities Prevention Act, right? And there was a massive, again, that was another movement. It lasted just one day, but nobody had anticipated that, you know, it'll be as big as it was, right? We were going to shoot it in West UP. None of us imagined that it's going to be something of this scale, right? That was the first. Then, and there are many others. I'm just saying these are the three I've seen most closely, right? The second was the anti-CA Andolan. Glorious movement. Nobody imagined that it'll be such a big, it'll snowball into something so beautiful, so big, so progressive. And the Kisan Andolan, you know, these three movements. And I've also come to realize that you can't create movements. You can keep working towards it, but it can't be artificially created. Movements are then finally, I think society comes to a point where then you can't even predict when the movement will become as big as it does, right? I think what you can keep doing is working to push in a certain direction, and tirelessly, effortlessly, if you can keep working to push in a certain direction, then these incredible rumblings will move in a progressive direction, right? Otherwise, we've seen how rumblings can move very, very rightwards. We've seen, I mean, the demolition of the Babri Masjid was, in my opinion, a very, very scary right-wing movement, right? So I really feel that one has to just not expect overnight results, because society functions and moves and transforms and changes at its own pace. It's slow, it's organic, but it keeps happening, you know. So where do you want it to change? How do you want it to change? Where does it, you know? So I think that's what one can work towards. That's the best one can work towards, right? And finally it can consolidate itself into something very beautiful or something very ugly as well. Unfortunately, I think what we've seen in the last 8 years, there have been some incredibly beautiful movements, and I think we will see and understand the real impact of that. I mean, of course, the SC/ST Atrocities Prevention Act was brought back. Even the CA and RC haven't been officially revoked, but the government doesn't talk about it at all.
Farmer laws have been
revoked. So those are the immediate effects. But the real effect that this will have on society is something we will know
after 20 years.
After 20 years, you know, and it's very difficult to quantify it. But it's just incredible how it has, you know, what it can lead to. We just the number of women that came from Haryana and participated in the movement, was fascinating. After Shaheen Bagh, now you have this movement. So the Muslim women who were leading that movement at the anti-CAA movement, and now you have all these women who hardly moved out. Women from agricultural communities, farming communities that have hardly moved out of the villages, have lived in very sort of patriarchal feudal societies, and are suddenly now, on stage singing, preparing songs, giving speeches. So I just think that the ripple effects of movements are much bigger than the immediate cause of what the movement started out for.
Right, excellent. Yeah, so thank you so much, Nakul. So that was Nakul Singh Sawhney. There's this one moment in history, in contemporary India's history, where Nakul's movie Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai was getting screened at Kidorimal College in Delhi University. There was some violence against it, and then in the University of Hyderabad, Rohit Vemula and friends tried to screen it. They got suspended, and later Rohit Vemula committed suicide, and he wrote a suicide note that became an ethical point of departure for Indian student movements. And when he said my birth was my fatal accident, and all the things that he said about how human beings are made of marvelous things that are made of stardust, but how we are reduced by it, it became it then started a new era for Indian students movement, Indian political projects in different ways. So Nakul, we've heard about Nakul's work and Nakul's views, but that one moment, so we are also here with a person who has been part of a particular moment in history in Indian Republic's journey into actualizing its promises, its egalitarian, inclusive vision. Thank you very much,
Thank
Nakul,
you so much
for that lovely conversation. Thank you.